All right, great. Well, hi everybody. We want to welcome you to this special Monona Terrace Wright Design Series Zoom edition. My name is Heather Sabin. I'm tourism coordinator at Monona Terrace, and if you have attended our lecture program in person in the past, I'm usually the one coordinating the event, and I'm happy to greet you today virtually. Since the building has closed, Monona Terrace has put many programs on Zoom actually, and I do want to let you know, for instance, that our meditation program is also on Zoom. In case you're interested, go to mononaterrace.com. I'm very pleased that Mark Hertzberg is game for joining us today in this format. He will speak for about an hour and take a few minutes of questions after that. So we ask that you type your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We will not use chat today, so please don't try to communicate to us via chat, but do send not only your questions, but any comments you have or feedback through Q&A, and we will see them there. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible after the presentation. So now a little bit about Mark. Mark's a native of New York City. He was staff photographer and later director of photography of the Journal Times in Racine from 1987 to 2012. He's the author and photographer of 4 books about Frank Lloyd Wright's work in southeastern Wisconsin. They are Wright in Racine, Frank Lloyd Wright's Hardy House, Frank Lloyd Wright's S.C. Johnson Research Tower, and the subject of today's talk, which is Frank Lloyd Wright's Penwern, a summer estate. You're looking at the cover there on the screen. And the Research Tower, which is, I assume, the S.C. Johnson Research Tower, will be published in Mandarin in China in late 2020. He's very active in the Wright community as an expert lecturer and as the newsletter editor and secretary of Wright in Wisconsin, the only statewide group devoted to the architect's work. He was the recipient of a prestigious Wright Spirit Award from the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy at the group's annual conference in Los Angeles in October 2019. And he just learned literally an hour or 2 hours ago that the Penwern book was named Silver Award winner in the architecture category of the 2020 Independent Publisher Book Awards. So congratulations, Mark.
Thank you.
And I will also just add that he has a website, which is www.wrightinracine.com. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Mark.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Heather, you and Monona Terrace facilitating this. Thank all of you for joining us. This is a new experience for me. I'm used to seeing the audience. I like to look at the audience and interact with them when I'm speaking. And I know you're out there. I can't see you. So Dan and Kay, Steve and Maureen from our trip to Morocco, before the lockdown, if you fall asleep, I won't know because I can't see pictures of the audience. So welcome, and I look forward to your questions. People who are familiar with Wright's work are most familiar with his year-round urban and suburban commissions. But he had about 50 commissions for summer cottages, waterfront homes, and about half of them were realized, most of them around the turn of the century. Delavan Lake is about an hour and a half southeast of Milwaukee, and Wright designed 5 homes for the lake between 1900 and 1905. There's also a boathouse that was designed in 1904, demolished in 1916. Wright's second client on the lake, the subject of our talk today, is Fred B. Jones. He was born in Peoria, smack in the middle of Illinois, #1 on the map that Eric O'Malley designed for us. When he was about a year old, the family moved to Pittsfield, which was the county seat for Pike County. And it's about an hour and a half west of Springfield. He went to high school in Jerseyville, Illinois, would have graduated in 1875. And a couple of years later, he moved to Chicago to seek fame and fortune. Unlike his brother, who was very well known, his brother went to Yale. His brother was assistant postmaster general for President Grover Cleveland, uh, many prestigious jobs. Jones was less well known. He did not have a college education, but that was not unusual in the day. His first job when he got to Chicago in 1877 was as a stock boy, stock clerk for a company called Adams and Westlake. Adams and Westlake was an immense manufacturing concern. They made beds. That's great. I sleep at night. They made kitchenware. I eat 3 meals a day. They made cameras. I'm a photojournalist. They made bicycles. I'm an avid cyclist. But their big stock and trade was hardware for steamship companies, streetcar companies, and trains. Their clients included the Pullman Coach Company. They made myriad kinds of hardware, the door handles, the luggage racks, the water fountains, the headlamps, the lanterns that conductors would carry, and so on. If you drive into Chicago from the north or the west and exit at Ohio Street, when you get to the traffic light at Ontario Street, you could see what's left of this huge manufacturing concern. He started out as a stock boy for the equivalent of $140 a week in today's money. He then became what's called a commercial traveler. That's what we call a traveling salesman today. He was a managing director of the company by 1900 when he was 42 and commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to design his summer estate. And he retired at the age of 50 in 1908 as vice president of the company. A couple of years later, remember his modest beginning with the company, his stock in the company was worth $10 million in today's money. I'm grateful to my friend Eric O'Malley. You may have known him from the old Prairie Mod website, Wright Society. He stumbled across this clipping about Jones in a Minnesota newspaper from 1888. One of the challenges in researching this book is that there is scant information about Jones. We have the facts of his life, but it was several years before I found any adjectives that described what kind of person he was. We're fortunate to have 17 surviving drawings of Penwern, but there's a dearth of correspondence between Wright and his early clients. I don't think it's because of the fires at Taliesin, because the drawings survived. Eric speculates it's because until Eugene Massillon came along, that there wasn't a secretary keenly interested in keeping and cataloging the correspondence. Jones was a commercial traveler, traveling salesman, when he lands in St. Paul, Minnesota, and ends up in this column that's news about traveling salesmen. And Jones is the only one who merited in that day's paper a drawing. This is the only early likeness we have of Mr. Jones in this kind of an article. The only photographs we have of Jones were taken when he was about 65 years old in the mid-20s. So we knew that he was quite stout. I tried unsuccessfully to find an autopsy report, really, to find out how much he weighed when he died, unsuccessful. But at this point in his life, it says he tips the beam at 215 pounds, and he appears to increase in avoirdupois each year. What's important here is it says, in addition to his business qualifications, he's a good storyteller, and many an evening that would otherwise prove tedious and dry is whiled away listening to his inexhaustible fund of anecdotes. And that's important because Penwern was apparently commissioned as a place for Mr. Jones, not only to get away from the hot Chicago summer, but to entertain his friends. This is the only picture we have of Mr. Jones at Penwern. Again, I think it's from the mid-20s, and he's about 65 years old here. Jones grew up, as we said before, at southwestern Illinois, but he was quite a world traveler. We're fortunate to have photo albums from his trip to the Orient in 1899. He's about 41 years old then, not his first trip abroad. And the real find is what you see in the two photographs at the bottom and the upper right album, his around the world cruise in 1924. I owe this find to my wife, Cindy. We were in tiny Griggsville, Illinois, near Pittsfield, poking around the Griggsville Historic Society when Rosie, the caretaker, said, "You can have all the time you want, but I don't know if you'll find anything." The place was an absolute mess. She said, "The person who knew where everything was killed in a traffic accident. So have at it, good luck." We went in the attic, we looked all over the place and found nothing. We did find things from Frank Hatch Jones, Fred's brother, whose second marriage was to Ulysses Grant's daughter. And there was a chair in the corner of the room, and Cindy said, "I wonder what's behind this chair." There was a cardboard box, and in that cardboard box were 4 photo albums from the Around the World cruise. Most of the pictures were likely taken by a shipboard photographer, but there were a few images of Fred B. Jones. You look at the large picture, he's the gentleman with the pith helmet, virtually in the center of the front row. And if you look 2 rows behind him, all the way to our left, is a woman in a dark dress, Dora Mortimer, the mystery woman in Fred's life. The photograph to the left, we see him on board the Resolute on crutches. A newspaper report tells us that Mr. Jones broke his leg on the trip. In Egypt, Eric O'Malley wonders if, frankly, he had trouble getting off the camel, and that's when the mishap occurred. This is the only picture of Jones and Dora Mortimer. Fred, who is an affable man, looks a bit dour here. He's not real happy. He's wearing spats. He's got what looks like a fur-lined collar. And Dora Mortimer was listed as a single woman in the 1900 Chicago census. By 1910, in the census, she's listed as a widow. One of the things that helped research the book, there were 2 weekly newspapers in Delavan early in the century, and they ran notes from the lake, social notes, roughly between Memorial Day and Labor Day. This was what we in the newspaper business hated to cover, what's called chicken dinner news. Who had chicken dinner with who on Sunday? And in 1904, there's a note that Mr. and Mrs. Henry Reuben Mortimer visited Penwern. I can find no record of Mr. Mortimer's death, but we do know she's listed as a widow. We don't know her role in Fred's life. They traveled together to the Orient in 1922, and of course around the world in 1924. Jones never married. His last residence in Chicago, the last few years of his life, was in the Parkway Residential Hotel near Lincoln Park. He had a suite of rooms at the north end of the 7th floor. She had a small apartment at the south end of the 7th floor. We don't know if they had a romantic relationship. We don't know if they were just social companions. We don't know if he was gay and she was cover for a gay lifestyle. And that last question has come up because the vast majority of the people listed as visiting Penwern were male friends of Fred B. Jones. When Jones died in 1933 at the age of 75, he left a lot of money to many charities. He left money to many of his cousins. He omitted about 6 cousins, and in his will, he said that he was doing so intentionally, and that if anybody sued anybody named in the will sued to help them get their money, they would be omitted from the will. The 6 people who were omitted from the will did sue because, among other things, Fred left Dora a trust fund worth $100,000 at the time and the diamond ring I wear. I know from one of Fred's cousin's granddaughters that her grandfather, one of Fred's cousins, was intentionally left out of the will because he was an adulterer and had cheated on her grandmother. So Fred provided for her grandmother and the children, but not for the adulterous first cousin. The cousins omitted sued, and finally in 1938, 5 years after his passing, the suit was settled. The cousins had alleged that Dora had taken advantage of a man of diminished mental capacity and so on, but there was no evidence to support that allegation. We tried to answer why Jones built on Delavan Lake and how did he and Frank Lloyd Wright meet, and there are no definitive answers to this. We can only speculate. Thomas H. Gale was a high school classmate of Henry H. Wallace. Wallace was the premier land salesman on Delavan Lake. So if you were going to build on the south shore of Delavan Lake, there was a good chance that you would buy your land from Henry H. Wallace. Wright designed one of his so-called bootleg houses for Thomas Gale in 1892. Gale and Wallace were high school classmates. Gale and Wallace and George Furbeck, for whom Wright designed a home in 1897, were also members of the same social club in Oak Park. So it's possible that Gale and or Furbeck introduced Wallace to Frank Lloyd Wright. Gale was a particularly close friend of Wallace, which strengthens that possible tie, because when Wallace married in 1895, there were only 25 guests at the wedding. One of them was Thomas H. Gale. Orlando Giannini, whom you may have heard of, he did some of the murals in Wright's home and studio in Oak Park, was a foreman at Adams and Westlake in the late 1890s. But we have no evidence of his being in the executive suite where Jones worked. So we don't know if there is a direct tie there or not. And the final piece of the possible puzzle is Ward W. Willits. And you may have heard of Willits in terms of the Willits House, a spectacular prairie-style home, some consider it the first one, on Sheridan Road in Highland Park, Illinois. Willits was always one step ahead of Jones on the executive ladder. So he's president of the company when Jones is vice president, and he's vice president when Jones is secretary. Willits vacationed on Delavan Lake in June of 1895. And we're fortunate to have 2 letters that he wrote home to his mother from the lake. He's sunburned, he's got hemorrhoids, but he's having the time of his life. He loves it on Delavan Lake, and he's not going to go on to his intended next stop. So think of Chicago in 1900, think of the summer, and the summer of 1900 was a particularly brutal one. There are newspaper accounts of people dying in the streets, horses dying in the streets, and so on. And so it is entirely conceivable that when Jones said, I want to build a summer house, that Willits said to him, take a look at Delavan Lake. So that brings us to Henry H. Wallace. Wallace, for a time, in the late 1800s, was a salesman for Chicago Hardware Company, and he sold knives that fishermen used and so on. His territory included Delavan Lake. By 1900, he has his own hardware company on Lake Street in downtown Chicago, and nearby, he's opened a land sales office. This is his second brochure for land sales on Delavan Lake. Jones bought Penwern in 10 parcels 9 of them were purchased through Henry H. Wallace. Wallace's connections with Wright may date back to 1894. There was a subdivision known as Wallacea, and this is a sign that Frank Lloyd Wright designed for Wallacea. The Wallace Gatehouse is the building to the right. Wallace built a cottage on the shore of the lake before he met Frank Lloyd Wright. And at the entrance to that property, he had the Wallace Gatehouse built. It's somewhat similar to the Nathan Moore House across the street from Wright's home and studio. You see that in the pictures on the left. There is a plaque on the Wallace Gatehouse that says 1897. Brian Spencer, a friend and architect who has researched the Delavan Lake work extensively, has found strong evidence that it was built in 1894. While there is no firm documentation that Wright designed it, it is generally attributed to him. In 1897, Wright did design this boathouse for Wallace on that property. It was demolished sometime before 1939, according to Carla Lynn's book, Lost Wright. In 1900, Wright designs a house for Henry H. Wallace. And this house is about 4 or 5 lots west of Penwern. It's now known as the Wallace Goodsmith House. Wallace very quickly sold it to the 2 Goodsmith brothers. The uppercase S is not a typo. It has been written in some places that Wallace sold the house because he was despondent over the death of his daughter. That's not true. His daughter actually died about 20 years after the house was completed. The porch that you see here, the open deck, is a recent addition. And I call your attention to the prow-shaped detail, the shape on the left side of the house, the same on the right side of the house, a bit of a nautical theme. What we know as the Wallace Goodsmith House was actually Wright's second design for Wallace, what the Wright Archives call Wallace Scheme 2. Wallace Scheme 1 is to the left. And you see an arched porte cochere, which is similar to what Wright gave Fred B. Jones at Penwern. I would not have been able to be successful with the Penwern book and my others if it were not for Robert Hartman, a friend, a designer in Racine, with a wealth of architectural knowledge and a very inquisitive mind. And Bob blew up the Wright Archive drawing of Scheme 1 like nobody had before in his photo editing software. And he noticed an outline of a covered walkway over the porte cochere and of a tower that could have been built at the left end of it. These are details that were executed at Penwern. We don't know if this is something that Wright proposed for Wallace, had that house been built, or as Pat Mahoney, architect, Wright scholar from Buffalo, suggests, was Wright using a discarded drawing of Wallace 1 as scratch paper, flushing out the ideas for what would become Penwern. The Wright Archives attribute this clubhouse on the lake as being designed for Wallace as well. There is evidence, though, that it's for Klein in Kentucky. I throw it in here only for those of you who have studied the Wright Archives and wonder why I don't include this Wallace sketch. Wallace is the client again in 1902 for the Yacht Club, which was demolished in 1916. It was demolished when the Yacht Club merged with a new golf club, and they built a nondescript clubhouse across the street. So now we come to Penwern and Fred B. Jones, Wright's second client on the lake. The property was about 8 acres until 1989 when it was subdivided. It's now about 5 acres. We have this map of the estate drawn by Eric O'Malley. At the bottom of the map, number 1 is the Gate Lodge. It was not built till 1903. As we go toward the lake, the stable, 1904, number 2. Number 3 is what Wright refers to as the cottage. Hardly a cottage in our vernacular. It's about 5,000 square feet. It was completed in 1901. And finally, on the lake shore, the Boathouse, built in 1902. It's been written in a number of places that Penwern is Gaelic for great house. It is not. Penwern is Welsh, not Gaelic, and it can mean at the head of the field or at the head of the alder tree. And Jack Holzheater, a Wright scholar from Madison, put me in touch with Georgia Lloyd Snoke, who's Frank Lloyd Wright's first cousin twice removed. And she reinforced a suggestion that Wright is honoring his maternal ancestors with the name Penwern. Wright's maternal grandmother, Mary James, grew up at Penwern, this modest cottage in Wales. She and her husband, Richard Jones, emigrated to America in 1844. And Jack speculates that Wright gets his American client, Jones, to honor the ancestral Joneses with the name. It's been written someplace that Fred B. Jones is related to the Frank Lloyd Wright Jones family. That is not so. This is a quick look at a map that Eric drew that places Penwern in Wales in relationship to London. So that's the beginning of the journey to bring Frank Lloyd Wright's ancestors to the so-called Valley of the God Almighty Joneses in Spring Green, Wisconsin. We're fortunate to have 17 surviving drawings of Penwern. And so what you're going to see now are the drawings with my contemporary photographs of Penwern. Penwern originally was stained dark brown or dark green, like the other lake cottages. There was a rustic feel to them. If you look all the way to the left in the drawing, you see an open porch. In 1909 and 1910, not 1920 as it had been written, Jones put 2 unsightly additions onto the house. You'll see pictures of that a little later. This porch was lost when the additions were put on. Stu and John Major became the stewards of Penwern in 1994 and set about a heroic restoration of the estate. One of the first things they did when they saw the original Wright drawings and realized the additions were not original and not designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the first tasks was to take down the additions. And John Major told me that when he would go to the grocery store, people would criticize him for destroying a Frank Lloyd Wright house. They didn't realize that Wright had nothing to do with the additions. Sue and John replicated the porch. The design is enclosed, though, for year-round use as a family room. Originally, it was their children's playroom. This is the west side of the house. The lake is to our left. And this is the view from the lake. 2 drawings are missing from the set of 17. This view of the north side, the lake side, and the opposite view. And Bob Hartman, 2 years ago, drew drawings in the style of what Wright had left to give us an idea. And you see the arch porte cochere. You remember we saw that in Wallace Scheme 1. And in the middle, on the first floor, you see the great rounded front porch looking over the lake. The bedroom on the second floor to the right is the master bedroom. You'll notice in the roof line, the raised roof ridge lines. This is a Japanese influence. And 3 of the 4 buildings at Penwern, the stable, the boathouse, and the main house or cottage all have this. All the way to the left is that tower that we got a glimpse of, a hint of, in Wallace Scheme 1. Jones loved to entertain people, and if you take the covered walkway above the porte cochere and you go into the tower and you have Jones, in today's language, his man cave. This was the card playing room. And it was certainly men only, because there was a porcelain urinal built into the wall of the card playing room. It drained to the ground below. This is what you see of the main house of the cottage as you come down the long driveway from South Shore Drive. Wright liked to reprise design elements. In the bottom left, again, we have Wallace Scheme 1. He doesn't give that to Wallace, so he does the porte cochere for Fred B. Jones. And Whitehall, Michigan is a community about an hour from Grand Rapids. And around 1902, Wright designed a series of summer cottages for some Chicago clients. And the Gertz cottage has an arch above the brook, below what used to be an open porch. And that reminded me, when I saw it, of the arch porte cochere at Wallace 1 and Penwern. This is the floor plan of the first floor of the main house at Penwern. In the middle, a bit to the left, and I'm sorry I don't have a pointer that I can use, you see the billiard room, and you see darkened lines to the left of that. We'll talk about that later. That's the safe room, and it says that there is to be a zinc floor there. And we go to the right, and you see three curves. Top and bottom are the side porches, and to our right is that front porch, the one overlooking the lake. But as we look at historic photos of Penwern, the porches were built with straight walls. The question is, why? There's no documentation. Again, we turn to Bob Hartman, and he blew up that floor plan of the house, and he noticed these straight pencil lines going from side to side under where it says open porch. And Bob speculates that somebody said to Wright, or Wright decided on his own, that it would have been quite a task to execute those rounded outer walls on the porches. And so Wright drew in these straight lines indicating that the porch walls should be built as straight lines, straight outer walls. John O'Shea, who was the steward of Penwern from 1989 to 1994, rebuilt the front porch to your right as semicircular per the drawings, and Sue and John Major did the same with the side porches about 4 years ago. The arch is the important design element. There's a 28-foot long arch spanning that front porch. This is looking back toward the stable, the gatehouse. The gate lodge is way off in the distance. And here we see the gate lodge, the photograph at Wright, the water tower of the gate lodge. And below that is one of Wright's drawings. And there are two important things on the right side. Jones loved growing roses. And so Wright has designed, or rather included, a commercially built greenhouse for him. And this is missing in the photographs you see. You'll see photographs later. It was taken down in the 1970s and replaced by a carport. And this space where the greenhouse had been is sort of like the missing tooth on a jack-o'-lantern. And on the right, on Wright's drawing, is a semicircular boulder wall, half of which has been missing for several decades. As you'll see in later photographs, Sue and John Major just last month have completed building a new greenhouse per the plans and rebuilding the boulder wall. The stone cap atop the little bridge over the creek that takes us to the main house reminds me of the dormers. I particularly like the three windows under this dormer. This is the second floor hallway on the west side of the house. And this is the late afternoon light coming in through those windows. These windows are at the top of the back stairs of the house, and I wonder if Wright didn't put them there to help illuminate the top of the stairs. Remember, there's only gas lighting when Penwern opens to Jones and his guests in June 1901. For me, one of the most magical parts of Penwern is the entrance. We come in a very wide, unusually wide front door, which is on the side of the house. And people talk about Wright's compression and release or path of discovery. And he's inviting you in. A home of the day would have had a walled off entryway. But as we come in, we can look off to the right into the living room. We can look straight ahead and off to the left into the dining room. And if we peek around the corner to the left, it's the billiard room. Excuse me. The ceiling above us, which pushes us even farther down when we climb these stairs, excuse me, is the balcony that on one side looks into the living room, the other side into the billiard room, and if we go straight back, it takes us to the card playing room. So the space explodes in front of us. It opens up. We're not confined, and we're invited to come in and explore. We have in black and white the next few pictures, historic photos, contemporary photos. The contemporary one of the living room. You see the billiard room off to the left. In the middle, we see the top of the stairs from the doorway. There is what looks like a little church above the wood molding, above the entrance, the entryway. That's right at the edge of the open balcony. And behind the sailboat in the middle, you see the stairs that go upstairs. It's looking into the living room. And another favorite part of mine of Penwern, there are two landings like the one you see here on the stairs going up to the bedrooms on the second floor. Wright presumably could have designed a conventional staircase, but he's given us two landings. And I think that they're there so that you're invited to pause, either talk to people still in the living room, or perhaps coming down in the morning, greeting them, or looking out to the right, looking out toward the lake. You don't make a rapid descent or ascent to the bedrooms. You're invited to pause and enjoy the space. This is another view of the landing. This is the dining room. The contemporary photograph, if you look straight back on the left, is the entryway of the house. In the middle, straight back, the billiard room. Wright is famous for having designed much of his furniture in windows. That's not the case at Penwern. The only furnishings that we know that Wright designed for Penwern are this magnificent dining room hutch and the liquor cabinet in the billiard room. Some built-ins and a dining room hutch in the gate lodge, which we'll visit soon. The windows have diamond-shaped canes. They were commercially available windows. Another view of the dining room, the billiard room, the liquor cabinet, which you'll see later, pulls out to reveal the safe room behind it. This is the master bedroom. There were 5 bedrooms in the house, only one bathroom upstairs. The only fireplace in any of the bedrooms was in Mr. Jones's bedroom, the master bedroom. Today, with remodeling, each of the bedrooms has its own bathroom. We are fortunate that there is this sheet of drawings of the boathouse, 4 views of it. If you look at the upper left picture, I don't know how well it'll translate on your computer. Is this Frank Lloyd Wright's whimsy or somebody else's? But there are 2 flag standards coming off the raised roof ridge lines, and somebody has drawn in flags. The one on the right has got the Jolly Roger. In September 1978, the boathouse was burned down in an arson fire. It lay in ruins for several decades. And Sue and John Major were determined to rebuild it. And this is what we have now, thanks to Sue and John Major. You see the arch over the doors facing the lake, and that echoes the great 28-foot arch over the front porch of the main house and the porte cochere. See the raised roof ridge lines? It's a tongue twister. Here we're under the 28-foot arch on the front porch. The gate lodge was not built until 1903. And I've long wondered, so that's 2 years after the main house was built. And I've long wondered, and there is no definitive answer, what it was like to arrive at Penwern and have nothing there but the long driveway down to the lakefront into the main house. The water tower for the gate lodge is the one on the right. It's been incorrectly written that that water tower has been demolished. It's very much there. The greenhouse is right behind it. There are 4 bedrooms here. Penwern was not heated till recent times. And so there was a year-round caretaker who lived in the heated gate lodge. And if Mr. Jones visited in winter, according to a former caretaker, he would displace one of the caretaker's daughters, and he would take one of the 2 bedrooms with a fireplace. And some people have said that the gate lodge is their absolute favorite of Frank Lloyd Wright's small domestic commissions. We have some historic views of the gate lodge, and in the bottom one, off to the left, you get a glimpse of the greenhouse. This is the living room of the gate lodge, and we're looking toward the dining room, and you'll see in the middle a little landing like the great one in the main cottage, a little landing taking us upstairs. This is the dining room hutch that Wright designed. Calling your attention to the doors here that go out to the porch. Those doors are not original. Originally, it was just a window there. That, as you'll see in a bit, was restored this spring as well. This is the dining room hutch that Wright designed for the gate lodge. The bedrooms, again, Wright designed the built-ins. The stable. There are 2 sets of drawings of the stable. We tried and tried and tried, and were not able to determine who delineated any of the drawings at Penwern. There is a marked difference between the one at the top here in terms of style, as well as the design, the one on the bottom, also on the next slide. And the bottom one is the design that was executed. And you'll notice a weather vane in the bottom one. And this is the south side of the stable. Originally, there were paddocks for horses on the left. When the property was subdivided in 1989 and a road built, that end of the stable was demolished. So here's a contemporary view of the stable and the drawing. And when the Majors moved in, they found this weather vane, FBJ, Fred B. Jones, in the living room. And they realized, looking at historic photos, and you can barely see it here, that it was indeed part of the original stable. Last year, they commissioned a replica, which is now sitting on top of the stable. There's now a museum in the stable with different artifacts. This is one of the original bedroom windows. Bill Orkild, the master builder, the master jack of all trades, who has done most of the restoration work at Penwern, mounted a picture of ice sailing behind this bedroom window that he salvaged. Different artifacts. On the left, we see some of the piping from the original greenhouse. The bottom right is the porcelain urinal that was mounted in the wall of the card playing room in the tower. altered and lost Penwern. The top picture again is that view we get of Penwern as we come down the driveway. And several bedrooms were added, and you could see a new entryway where that original open porch had been. The photo below is the west side with another addition which covered most of the dining room windows and some of the living room windows as well. We don't know for sure why Jones commissioned the additions. They were done 1909, 1910, after Wright has left for Europe. The inventory of the estate after he died talks about how many servants' bedrooms are in them. And there was only one servant's bedroom originally. It's possible that Jones decided he needed many more servants' bedrooms to run the estate. One of the bedrooms is a master suite with a bathroom. It's been speculated that it was for Jones's grandmother. Both his grandmothers and his mother predeceased the design of Penwern, so that's not true. We don't know if it was for Dora Mortimer. We just don't know. These pictures are courtesy of Betty Schacht, whose grandparents were caretakers of Penwern and lived in the Gate Lodge at the time of Mr. Jones's death. It looks like bootleggers on top. It isn't. It's not Mr. Jones. These pictures are from 1935, 2 years after he died. You see the original greenhouse, the one that Wright had on his drawing, the upper photo. And Jones loved growing roses, as I mentioned. So at some other point, he had another greenhouse, the one in the bottom photograph, put on the west side of the gatehouse. And this is a view of the Gate Lodge as it was when the Majors acquired it in 2000. They bought the rest of the estate in 1994. You see the carport to the left where that first greenhouse had been. On the right, you can see the secondary greenhouse. And on the first floor on the right, you see a covered space. Originally, that was an open porch, and that has been completely restored this spring, as you'll see later. When this property was subdivided, they also lost two swinging metal gates, one on each side of the property. You see it on the left side of the top photo, and these were designed to pivot and close automatically. It looks as if Wright may have designed them. In the photograph, we see Burr Robbins, who with his wife Peg was the second steward of Penwern starting in 1938. There is mention in one of the Delavan papers of a trellis that Wright designed. This may be it. And the water tower in back is one that Jones put up around 1917 for fire protection. Held 12,000 gallons of water, and that was taken down as well when the property was subdivided. At some point, the boathouse was badly damaged. We see the wonderful arch is gone, this new entryway. This picture is from the 50s or 60s. Another alteration to the boathouse, and it gives us a hint of what may have been the original colors. And we come to the other stewards of Penwern after Mr. Jones. We see Peg in the middle and Burr Robbins, 1939 till he passed away in the 1970s. They had large mirrors that they put up in the living room, which covered some of the living room windows. Burr was a highly successful executive with an outdoor advertising business, billboard business, and he had two children, Terry on the left in the bottom photo and Ross on the right. And we see Ross and Terry reading the funnies in the Chicago Sunday Tribune, August 1941, in the billiard room, which was their breakfast room. And on the right, we're delighted to have a picture of Ross Robbins. And hello, Ross, if you're with us today. Ross in the living room of his beloved Penwern a year ago when Sue and John graciously had a book launch party for the book. John O'Shea became the steward of Penwern in 1989, and he sold it in 94 to the majors. He kept the guest book. We see pictures of the front porch being rebuilt with the original shape that Wright intended, and we're indebted to him for having found the drawings of Penwern. Sue and John Major with their children. And on the right here is Bill Orkill, the Wizard of Penwern. Bill with Bob Hartman, looking at drawings, and they're studying the stable to see how closely it matches with Wright's drawings. We see the beginning of the demolition of the additions, and you could see how local people would have been upset not realizing this was not part of Frank Lloyd Wright's design. The carport coming down, extensive rebuilding of the gate lodge, and again, bottom right, we see the enclosed porch, which is supposed to be open. The stable was an absolute horror to work in, Bill Orkill tells me. It's beautifully restored now. This is a floor plan of the stable. On the left, it says paddock for horses. Again, that was lost when John O'Shea subdivided the property. John was the steward of the Wallace Goodsmith house when Penwern came on the market. He sold Wallace Goodsmith and he bought Penwern, he tells me, with the intention of flipping it. And literally the day that he closed on Penwern, he sold off lots on the east and west side of it. And that's when the property went from 8 to 5 acres. The majors had quite a battle with local authorities to get the zoning to rebuild the boathouse in 2005. It was rebuilt from plans, Brian Spencer, architect, and Russ DiPietro from Delavan did a major part of the planning for the rebuilding the boathouse. And local township authorities did not want to allow the work to go on. And so Brian Spencer told me that he called in every chip that he had. And there is a binder of letters from internationally known architects, Cesar Pelli, from Wright scholars, from people literally from around the world, telling the township, you must allow this to be rebuilt. We're pleasantly surprised that the township did not say, you have no right to tell us what to do. And the boathouse is, as we've seen it in previous pictures. Burr Robbins painted the dining room. Burr and Peg had the dining room painted white. That includes Wright's hutch. So again, part of Bill Orkill's work was to restore the hutch to its former glory. This is when he's rebuilding the side porches with the round outer walls. And we come to the billiard room. This is a blow up of that floor plan. And you see the dark lines in the middle, and that's the safe room, and it calls for a zinc floor. It's been written that the safe room was a place for Jones to store his hooch during Prohibition. It wasn't. It makes no sense. The house predates Prohibition by about 20 years, and really the feds wouldn't have cared if he had liquor in the house. It was, as Jack Holzheater says, a room with a safe, a place for gentlemen to keep his valuables and his cash during the summer season. And it says on the drawing, case to roll in place. That's the liquor cabinet. And we see the casters, which have been upgraded by Bill Orkill. Bill told me that one day he came in to work in the billiard room, and the liquor cabinet had rolled out away from the wall. Nobody realized before that it was on casters. In 1930, Jones turned the safe room into a powder room, a bathroom. So we see the door on the right that Jones had put in. And before that, if you rolled out the case, it was just the door into the safe room back there. The majors had Bill restore it to the original purpose, a safe room. In the upper left, you see the door from the powder room. In the right-hand photograph, you see the ingle nook that we now have. There's no more powder room. There's the safe room behind the liquor cabinet. And this is restoring the lost greenhouse in Boulder walls. And these are photographs from within the last month. The bottom is one of Wright's drawings. To the right, you see the greenhouse going top to bottom. The rest of Pietro's drawings for the work that Bill Orkild has done. And also rebuilding the Boulder wall, half of which had been lost. And again, Bob Hartman pointing out that half the wall was missing. Nobody had realized it before. Bill at work, upper left, saved as many of the original boulders as he could. This photo was taken just last Monday, as it was the bottom one here. We go back to the modifications to the gate lodge and restoring those modifications. The upper left, at some point, the chimney was rebuilt as a brick chimney. This photograph taken last Monday, it's stucco again as of this spring. And you could see in the bottom photograph what had been that enclosed porch is once again open as Frank Lloyd Wright intended. Entertainment was always a key part of Penwern. That's why Jones built Penwern. These are photographs from summer parties that Sue and John host every July 4th. Burr Robbins in his white suit. He had parties around July 4th every year, executives from General Motors, Delco, and so on. Of course, it's only men in the dining room, ashtrays at many of the place settings. John O'Shea told me that his best and worst memories of Penwern had to do with parties, entertaining. His best memory was the wedding reception, his first marriage, on the ruins of the Boathouse. And his saddest memory was what they called the Aloha Party, when he sold Penwern and had a farewell party for his friends. And again, here we see that West Edition that Jones put on. Very quickly, the other Wright homes on Delavan Lake, the Spencer House and the Ross House. Spencer on the left was for the daughter and son-in-law of the Ross family, and it's the only one diminutive enough in my vocabulary to be considered a cottage. They've all been substantially altered. The bottom is the drawing that Wright made, the original Ross House. And in the 20s, the open porch on the left was enclosed. Second floor was added there, and the second floor was added to the right as well. The Spencer cottage has a prow-shaped front porch facing the lake. Remember the prow-shaped sides of Wallace Goodsmith? The house was built without indoor plumbing. It was an outbuilding for that. In the 1980s, it burned down, and so the Millers, who are now the stewards of the Spencer cottage, built a new master bedroom with indoor plumbing on the back of the house, and the design mimics the front prow-shaped porch. The most dramatic alteration is the A.P. Johnson house, which originally was 2 stories, and the Campbells inserted a bottom floor, the early 2000s. It's got guest rooms, family room, and so on. The other cottages are board and batten. This one was tongue and groove. Again, it was originally dark stained. And the open porches on the first floor, that's the middle level here, are now enclosed for year-round use. Penwern, indeed, it's a sweet place. I apologize, this is my one pun. This is the cake that the majors graciously commissioned for the book launch party last year. This is the wonderful view from the front porch as the sun sets across the lake. We see the boathouse off to the right. And I'm going to leave you with something else I want you to think about. I normally ask people to look around the room. We can't do that here. But think about the fact that we probably generally all look alike. We're probably Caucasian. We're probably in the same age demographic. That is what I have seen in my Wright talks and different Wright groups I belong to for 20 years. But I challenge you to change your thinking about who can be excited about Frank Lloyd Wright's work. This is Marshall Jones. I interviewed him at Waupun Correctional Institution 10 years ago, the bottom photograph. He's serving 2 consecutive life terms for double homicide. I took the top picture of him when I worked for the newspaper at the instant that the judge told him he would not follow the DA's recommendation of a 35-year sentence. He called him evil incarnate and sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms. I asked Marshall if there was anything good about the criminal justice system. And he said it must work because I'm in here. I was astonished. He said the school was good because it challenges him. And he said the library is good. What do you like to read, Marshall? Anything I can get my hands on. I sent him my Wright and Racine book, my first book, as a thank you for his time, for the interview, for being so open with me. And I got an astounding book review back from him within a short period of time. We started corresponding, and a year later, he sent me a picture of himself in cap and gown. He'd gotten a degree in the building trades from a technical college. I sent him the Hardy House book. Again, a wonderful analysis and review of the book. He read Ron McCrae's wonderful book, the late Ron McCrae, Building Taliesin. And he wrote a review of it, which I sent to Ron. And Ron wrote back to me and said, Marshall picked up on something nobody else has. I'm going to quote him in a speech I'm giving at Taliesin West next week. I shared some of his letters with the late Bruce Brooks Pfeiffer. Bruce came to Taliesin and Wright's World in the late 1940s and organized Wright's archives and wrote more books about Wright than anybody else, scholarly books. And Bruce was so taken by Marshall's writing and insight into the work of Frank Lloyd Wright that he corresponded with him until he died. And so I just ask you to think about Marshall as we try to expand our thinking about who can be excited about the work of somebody like Frank Lloyd Wright. I thank you all for spending time with us today, and I'll be glad to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. We virtually applaud you. Please know we appreciate your presentation, though you can't see many of us. I do have a number of questions here,
Good.
so I will start at the top of the list.
Put me on the spot.
Yes, yes. What influence did the Taliesin bird walk have on the design of Penwern, if any?
It had none. The bird walk came, actually, I think it was in the 1950s. Wright designed it for Ogavana Wright.
Okay.
And also Taliesin itself, the original, what's called Taliesin 1, was designed in 1911, so it postdates Penwern.
Got it. There's a question about...
One other second. The bird walk, and there's another one, or cantilevered, and we don't see cantilevers at Penwern.
Oh, okay, interesting. I have a question about an early slide you showed with a trunk on it stamped SS Resolute.
Yes.
Is this the same ship that the president's desk is made out of in the Oval Office?
That's a good question. It's not a trunk photo album. I think that the president's desk may have been from a warship. I mean, I could Google it now if you want, but I think that's what I've read in the past. And this is a passenger liner. And I would think that it's more likely that a presidential desk comes from a warship than a passenger liner, perhaps an historic sail-powered warship.
I tried to do a little internet research in the meantime and didn't get an answer, so we'll have to let you all do some research on that.
Yeah.
Is Wallacea cataloged in Storer, the Storer Guide Directory to Wright's Buildings?
Okay, I'm sorry, what about it? I didn't.
Is Wallacea, am I pronouncing it
Wallacea.
correctly? Yep.
I can get my Storer. Okay, Wallacea was an area with non-Frank Lloyd Wright buildings.
Okay.
The gatehouse, I'm not sure Storer has that or not. Pfeiffer does not have it in his book. He has that sign in the 3-volume Taschen. He dates it to the early 1900s, but Brian Spencer dates the gatehouse to 1894. And the way Brian does that, this stuff gets esoteric, but Wallace's wife's family was German, and she or her mother taught German. And Brian was there with a recent steward of it. And they pulled newspapers out of the walls, newspapers that had been used for insulation. They were German language newspapers from 1894. And so.
Interesting.
It seems, yeah, to be a likely date for it.
Here's a question about materials. Is the rock used in and around the house local, or was it brought in from somewhere else?
Great question. I don't know where it came from. We know that Wright liked to use local materials. I don't know how close this stone, how close to Penwern it came from.
Okay. We had a couple of questions about that safe room.
Yes.
What was the purpose of it? And then also, how do the present stewards, or what do they keep in the safe room now, if we know?
Okay, the original purpose, Jack Halsheater speculates, was as a safe room, a room with a safe, a place, as he put it, excuse me, for gentlemen to keep his money, his jewelry, and other valuables when he's at the lake for the summer. The present purpose, it's a private room for the majors. I know one very, very important reason for it to exist. They have a whole lot of copies of the Penwern book there.
It's the library.
They have personal things in there, but I think it's more that they wanted to restore to somewhat the original, certainly the original look, and they took out the powder room.
Okay. So we have some great wishes of thank you and
Thank you.
praise, which I'll pass on to you after we're done here. What are the primary materials for the buildings at Penwern, and where were they sourced?
Again, the sourcing, I'm not sure, but the buildings, there's some stucco, upper floor, second floor, some of it, but first floor, so on, is wood. It's board and batten. I don't know what wood. I should know. I'm sorry. I can't tell you where it came from.
Any idea of original costs?
No, there is absolutely no record of that whatsoever. And, among the questions that I raised in the book that we don't know, of course, the stuff that I mentioned, why did Wright come to Delavan Lake? Is it because Ward told him it's the place to go, good place to build? How did he and Wright meet? But was he satisfied with Wright's designs? Did they go back and forth? How much sparring was there? We have 2 schemes for the Wallace cottage, but we have no written record of that. We know who the contractor was, a man named Tunis, and we tracked down some Tunis descendants, and there are no records that we know of that Mr. Tunis left either. So that there are no building permits. We tried those avenues. I'm sorry I can't answer that.
Who is Eric O'Malley? You've mentioned him a couple of times.
Eric O'Malley is actually industrial designer, package designer in the Chicago area. But he is also, that's the other job. He and some partners have OAD, Organic Architecture and Design. And I highly recommend that you subscribe to their magazine, you look at their website. $50 an issue, 3 issues a year, but worth it. And for a long time, he had a daily weblog called The Prairie Mod, which many Wright aficionados knew. And now he and his associates have a weekly update called The Wright Society. And OA&D, Organic Architecture and Design, have many Wright artifacts, archival materials. Some of the original windows from Wright's Thomas P. Hardy House in Racine were recently donated to OA&D. They have glass plate negatives of some old Wright homes and so on. So they have a wealth of knowledge. Eric is a great resource for me.
Oh, that's great. And so people can sign up for that Wright Society.
That is correct.
Newsletter, and it's a great source of stories around the country. You know, it's an aggregator of stories around the country about Wright. Can you share the quote that your friend Marshall made about Wright's work?
I would have to dig into, I have kept all his letters. You mean the one that Ron McCrae used? I would have,
sure.
Yeah, I've got, letters from 10 years.
Okay.
And I don't remember if Ron wrote me exactly which quote it was from Marshall, but Marshall, sadly he's got a lot of time on his hands. And Marshall, it's a sad story. He told me he was, I asked him, when you got to Waupun, did you know people here? He's now in medium security institution. And he said, yeah, I walked in here and people said, Marshall, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be getting your doctorate now. And he told me he was a 3-point something student, went to Golda Meir High School in Milwaukee, very prestigious high school, Magnet High School. Went to live with his father for a while in Joliet, Illinois. They got into a fight. Father brought him back to Milwaukee, and Marshall threw his life away after that. Essentially, is what he told me. So he's a very bright man.
Right. That's been a very fruitful relationship for you.
Yes.
Is Penwern, this says, when will the owners open Penwern for tours?
Okay. Well, it is a private residence. And Sue and John have been very generous with different Wright groups. They have allowed Wright in Wisconsin, the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust to hold tours. These are obviously fundraising things for those organizations, but it's not something that we would expect a homeowner to do on a daily basis or weekly basis. It is their summer home after all. And but they're very generous. Another one, there's a wonderful 5th grade architectural immersion class in Menominee, Wisconsin, Wakanda Elementary School. And Heather, you've worked with them.
As a matter of fact, Mark, Sally Johnson is an attendee because she wrote a comment to you. Thanks for sharing this presentation.
Hi, Sally. Say hi to Ann. And it's a wonderful program, really engaging for these 5th graders. And Sue and John were very happy to welcome 55th graders a few years ago. So they're very welcoming to groups.
They sure are great. They're wonderful educators. A couple questions about the greenhouse that I'll kind of combine here.
Yes. Okay.
How do the majors plan to use it? And then did Jones have it built originally or added later?
Okay, 1 second. Excuse me. Jones had it built originally. It's a commercial design, but Wright included it on the plans. I'm not sure that you could have a Frank Lloyd Wright design greenhouse. So, he bought a commercial design. It was built in 1903 when the Gate Lodge was built, taken down in the 70s by a subsequent owner because it had deteriorated badly. And Sue and John are looking, as I understand it, to use it as an entertainment venue. They can have small gatherings there, but roses, which Fred liked to grow there, will not be forgotten. There are going to be bountiful roses around it, and I'm sure there'll be some in it as well, but it will not be primarily to grow plants or grow roses. Speaking
of John Major,
yes,
we have a comment from him here. He's an attendee. So our owner is present, and he says all of the rock comes from a local quarry, which is still in operation. Thank you,
good.
John.
Thank you, John. Now I know.
Let's see. There are diamond-shaped patterns on the columns of the porte cochere walkway and lakeside porch. Oh, this is Bob Hartman, by the way. Your friend.
Hi, Bob.
In looking at this presentation today, it has occurred to me that these patterns are almost identical to the diamond glass windows. Would you agree that this is where Wright might have gotten the idea for this ornamentation?
That makes absolute sense to me. Bob, my question to you is, why didn't you bring that up to me when I was writing the book? And when the question started, I started thinking about the tie-in. Never occurred to either of us to now, but I think you're right.
I love that we're making discoveries on the Zoom.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
And the source for the observation that these were commercially produced windows comes from Julie Sloan, who had a landmark exhibit in book maybe 20 years ago about Wright's fenestration, the windows that he designed.
Great. So what's great about this Q&A box is that people are starting to answer each other's questions.
Good.
And so the Oval Office desk was actually made from the HMS Resolute. It was a gift from Queen Victoria in 1880 and made from the timbers of the HMS Resolute, according to Rochelle. Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank
and
you.
I had another person also address that. Mark, did Jones only summer at Penwern, and where were his other residences?
He summered at Penwern. He occasionally came up during the winter, according to the social notes of the papers, but that was, I think, a rare visit for him. It was basically a summer residence. Once he moved to Chicago in 1877, that was his main residence. I've got written down in the files different places that he lived in Chicago. And the last few years of his life, maybe the last 5-6 years, I don't know exactly how long, he was at the Parkway Residential Hotel, which is near Lincoln Park. It's still standing. It's a condo building now. And that was where he had that 7th floor suite that he shared with his cook, and Dora was at the other end of the hall.
Thank you. This is
one other thing about Dora, I'm sorry. When she applied for a passport for the 1922 trip to the Orient with Jones, her passport application was witnessed by the manager of the fur department of Marshall Field and Company. And so I wanted to find out how he knew her, to vouch for her. Was she a customer, a known customer, or was she a known employee? And unfortunately, Macy's bought Marshall Fields. And so when I talked to them, they said, well, if you give me her social security number, maybe I can tell you something. Well, there were social security numbers back then, and I wouldn't have her social security number anyway. So those records are lost.
A little bit of a dead end.
We had a heck of a time. We wanted to know more about Adams and Westlake, as is Eric O'Malley for years, Tim Samuelson, the phenomenal cultural historian for the city of Chicago. Adams and Westlake left that building, which is still standing, in 1927 or 1928. They moved to Elkhart, Indiana. They're still in existence. And Tim told me that he scoured the basement of the building in recent decades, and there are just no records left there. And the company archives don't tell us anything about Jones. There's one letter with Ward Willett's name on it. There's one letterhead that's, yeah.
There's a question here about the arson that took place at the Boathouse. Was that ever resolved, or?
It was resolved. Motive unknown to me. It became a tangential story. There are some details people don't want to share, and that's fine. I want to focus on the fact that we have the Boathouse again. That's what's important. Mm-hmm. There have been a number of arsons on the lake that summer. It's not like this was the only targeted fire.
I see. I'm just scanning some of the last of the questions here. The original driveway, was it gravel or are there plans to restore it?
I will let John chime in, but I would assume it must have been gravel, but I can't see gravel that would chip cars and be, less pleasant to ride on. But John, I'll turn that over to you.
We'll see if he chimes in here. Do we know when Wright last visited Penwern?
Good. I'm glad you brought that up. We have no record of Wright ever seeing anything on the lake, except there's one note we stumbled across. In 1905, he's visiting either the site or the house for A.P. Johnson. And incidentally, for those of you who study the archives, I have in the book that it's Arthur P. Johnson, and that's what's in the official Wright archives. A descendant has written me that it was Andrew Johnson. We don't know definitively. There are two urban legends. There's an urban legend that Wright was riding his horse and saw the color of one of the cottages and was disgusted and rode away. We have never found documentation to substantiate that. The other urban legend is that he was disgusted by the Spencer cottage when he saw that there were vertical battens on the second floor on top of the horizontal battens on the first floor. That doesn't make sense because that's the way Wright designed the cottage. It's not like it was built contrary to his design. So we know in 1905 he visited the lake with client Johnson. That's all we know definitively.
Thank you. Michael has chimed in here that Wright designed a greenhouse for Avery Coonley in 1911.
Oh, good.
So again, we're kind of
ask Michael, did he design the greenhouse or put in a commercial design like here?
Okay, we'll find out. He does say designed.
Okay.
Lots of your friends here chiming in, so I'll make sure to pass along their well wishes.
I can't believe, Bob, that we don't have another observation from you. I'm expecting more from you, Hartman.
He does say that you can credit him with that observation in your reprint of the book.
Okay.
So I believe I'm just many good comments here. Some are not questions. John Major again says the driveway is currently asphalt. Stay tuned. We're rethinking how to achieve a gravel look.
Oh, okay. Perfect. I knew, John, that the greenhouse and the open porch, the chimney, the stable museum, I knew that you couldn't stop just there. There always is something more, which is wonderful. And I don't like the term owners for historic properties. I like the term stewards. And I think that says more about the care that, for example, Sue and John have that the Robbinses had, and they renamed it Robbinswood at the time, or John O'Shea in rebuilding that porch and preserving the drawings that he found. So I think stewardship is a good term.
Great. I think the subject of your next book, Mark, is going to be greenhouses at Wright Properties. Stephen says Keeland and Tirana, or is it just Tirana, have small greenhouses as well. So
the one at Keeland,
designed by Wright or not, but
the one at Keeland is likely from Jack Howe's 1961 edition, because that's tacked on, or not tacked on, that's next to the garage, which was part of Jack Howe's 1961 edition. So I don't think that's part of the 1954 original. The late Karen Johnson Boyd, who was Karen Keeland when it was designed, I had the privilege of knowing her husband, Bill Boyd, and Karen never mentioned greenhouse as being part of the original design. Well,
I want to say we have so many wonderful comments here that thank you for your presentation. And also, by the way, thank the majors for their hard work
Indeed.
and diligence in
Indeed.
restoration. So,
You know, I gotta add, this has been an adventure. One of my wife Cindy's cousins was a nanny for Sue and John, and she gave them a copy of my Hardy House book as a present. And Sue Major called me April 2013, a year after I left the newspaper, and said, "We have your Hardy House book. I wonder if you could do a book for us like that." And I never dreamt what a fun adventure this would be, a 5-year project. And I'm also thankful that the Wisconsin Historical Society Press was interested enough to decide to publish it. And so it's been, you know, that one phone call, one gift of a book, and it's been an absolute adventure.
That's great. Well, thank you for your scholarship, and we look forward to the next one. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. This has been fun, and I should have known that when you get Wright enthusiasts in a quote unquote room together, there's going to be lots of exchange, and this has been fun to watch this Q&A unfold here. So I'll make sure to pass along to Mark your well wishes.
Thank you.
And we'll certainly let you know if we do another one of these on Zoom. We don't have one scheduled at this time, but we hope to do more. So thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate it. I'm actually going to stay on the Zoom myself for just a few minutes to make sure that I capture some of these things from the Q&A. But Mark, you and I.
Dan and Kay, Stephen, Maureen, I'm still editing pictures from Morocco. I'm not done yet. One day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.